Have you ever delivered a really good lesson? I mean, everything was clear, your slides were on point, you covered all the learning outcomes, but something still didn't feel right. The students were quiet, they were taking notes, they were nodding along, but deep down you could tell they weren't really with you. I've had that moment more times than I can admit. Welcome back to I'm the Rookie, the podcast for those of you who have years of experience but you know there's more for you out there. Whether that's stepping into teaching, growing your confidence, or simply doing things differently in your career. And today's episode is one that really made me stop and reflect on how I teach because I realized something that changed everything for me. When I first started teaching, my focus was exactly where you'd expect it to be: the content, the learning outcomes, making sure I covered everything and covered every student's need to pass the assignment or exam. And to be honest, that's what most of us are trained to do. You've got a syllabus to follow, you've got criteria to fit, and you want your students to succeed. So naturally, your mindset becomes, what do I need to teach today to help them pass? And I remember delivering sessions where I thought, yes, that was a good lesson. But over time, I started noticing a pattern. Students will ask questions like, is this going to be in the assignment? Do we need to know this? Or do we need to remember this bit? Which part is the most important for the exam? And at first, I didn't think much of it, but then it started to click. They weren't asking because they wanted to understand more. They were asking because they wanted to do the minimum required to pass. Not all of them, but some of them. And I had to be honest with myself. Had I created that environment? Had my teaching made them focus more on passing than actually learning? That was a hard question to sit with. The real turning point for me came when I started listening differently, not just to what students were saying, but how they were approaching their learning. And I realized something quite simple, but quite powerful as well. If everything I say in a lesson is framed around the assignment, then of course, that's what they're going to focus on. So I had to shift my approach. Instead of teaching just to help them pass, I started teaching to help them become confident in their role that they were working towards, become knowledgeable beyond just the assignment, become someone who actually understands what they're doing. And that meant making them more responsible for their own learning. One of the things I started doing differently was being really clear with my students. I will say to them, this session is not just about your assignment. Yes, it will help you, but that's not the main goal. The main goal is that when you step into your role, you know what you're doing. And I began to ask them questions in my sessions. Instead of doing delivery content, I pause and say, what do you think about this? How would you apply this in your own setting? What would you do differently? And at first, some of them were a bit unsure because they were used to just being told everything. But slowly, you start to see the shift. They start thinking more, they start engaging more, and they start taking ownership. And that's when the real learning happens. And this is exactly something that I see a lot, even with my learners within Developing Educators Academy. They come in thinking teaching is about delivering content, but very quickly, especially when they start planning their micro teach or reflect on their sessions, they realize it's much deeper than that. It's about how you engage your learner. It's about how you include them in the process. It's about how you help them take responsibility. And once that clicks, their confidence as an educator changes completely. Something that I want you to think about. Are your students learning because you're teaching, Or are they learning because they're actively involved in the process? There's a big difference. So in this episode, I shared a shift that I really changed how I approach teaching, moving from focusing purely on content and learning outcomes to thinking about how I can involve my students in their own learning. Because when learners only focus on passing, they'll always look for the quickest way to get there. But when they feel responsible for their learning, they start to think differently, engage differently, and show up differently. And that's where the real growth happens. If there's one thing you take away from this episode, it's this. Your role as an educator is not just to deliver content. It's to create an environment where your learners take ownership of their learning. If this episode made you pause and reflect, I'd love for you to share it with someone who's either teaching or thinking about teaching, or even just questioning how they can show up in their role. And if you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And if you've been enjoying this podcast, leave a review. It really helps more people to find this podcast. And remember, you're no rookie. It's time to take action.